Novo izdanje Jazeera Svijeta je pred nama. Ja sam Azra Hadžić. U nastavku ove priče. Kako je sin izraelskog generala i unuk potpisnika Deklaracije o neovisnosti Izraela postao zagovornik palestinskih prava i mirnog rješenja izraelsko-palestinskog sukoba. Novinarka i aktivistica za ljudska prava Orly Noy govori o boli, izolaciji i utišavanju izraelske antiratne ljevice nakon 7. oktobra. Šta čeka Pojas Gaze nakon rata? Visoki izraelski zvaničnici pozivaju na dugoročno vojno prisustvo, američki se protive ponovnoj okupaciji. Rođen je i odrastao u Jerusalemu, u, kako kaže, izraelskoj, patriotskoj, cionističkoj porodici. Sin generala, unuk potpisnika Deklaracije o neovisnosti Izraela. Za Al Jazeeru govori kako je postao zagovornik palestinskih prava i mirnog rješenja izraelsko-palestinskog sukoba. Objašnjava koliko je za njega bilo teško i bolno saznanje u životu da je Izrael donio nasilje u Palestinu i nametnuo apartheid. Istakao je kako izraelski političari žele demografskim inženjeringom zaokružiti i uspostaviti etnički čistu državu bez prisustva Palestinaca i drugih zajednica.
I was born and raised in Jerusalem and to a very, prominent, patriotic Israeli Zionist family. And my father was a general in the Israeli military in 1967. My grandfather signed the Israeli Declaration of Independence, and I had many other members of the family who held important positions. We had a great uncle who was a president, and so on. So I was born and I was raised and grew up to be a very proud Israeli, a proud Zionist. And it wasn't until much later in life that I embarked on what I call in my book, in my memoir, The General Son. The subtitle is Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. So I embarked on this journey and discovered that there was a Palestine, because as an Israeli, you don't know that there's a Palestine. You only know that there's an Israel, and you think it's all Israel. But gradually I discovered that there's a whole other people there, and they live in a different reality completely. And so I took this journey into that reality, which for an Israeli is considered very dangerous because we are taught that they want to kill us, that they're murderers, they're terrorists, and that sort of thing. But eventually I came to realize that it wasn't they who were the dangerous foreigners, but we, the Israelis, who are the dangerous foreigners. We are the settlers. We are the ones who have imposed violence. We are the ones that brought terrorism to Palestine. And we are the ones that imposed an apartheid regime. Now, I didn't know, at first, I didn't know the terminology, but I remember as a child just driving through Palestinian towns and Palestinian neighborhoods and seeing the difference and realizing we did not live the same lives. We did not have the same rights. We did not have the same privileges. Even as a boy, I could see it. But of course, later on, once I took this journey, I realized it was apartheid, and I realized that the violence that exists in Palestine was brought by us and is caused by my side, which of course is a very difficult, very painful realization.
Yeah, I was wondering how your family reacted to your journey.
Well, look, there are different people in my family who had similar journeys, who had similar journeys themselves, perhaps not to the extent that I did. But my father himself, after he retired from the military, promoted the idea of the two-state solution. This is right after the 1967 war. Of course, Israel was engaged in building massively for Jews only in the newly conquered territories, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and so on. But he promoted the idea of the two-state solution and Palestinian rights granted within the limitations of the Zionist construct. Later on, sadly, in 1997, or tragically, my sister's little girl was killed by Palestinians in a suicide attack in Jerusalem. And she reached out and said, Israel is responsible for the death of my child, just like Israel is responsible for the death of so many Palestinian children. So everybody, there's several people in my family that had taken journeys in this direction. Like I said, granted, not all of them have taken quite the extent, not quite to the extent that I have.
Right. When you say that Israel is an apartheid state, I mean, these words carry significant weight. I mean, I was wondering Even professors based in top-notch American universities are very careful when describing Israel using such terminology. I was wondering whether you faced any backlash from fellow Israelis.
Well, certainly Israelis don't like to be told that they are living in an apartheid regime and that they actually established an apartheid regime. They like to believe they live in a democracy, but that's because they exist within their own bubble. They exist within the sphere of Israeli Jews who are the privileged side of the apartheid state, just like I was. When you're on the privileged side of the apartheid, you don't know that it's an apartheid necessarily. And when you see the differences, you ignore them because it's very convenient.
Right.
And you believe the stories that you're told that the other side is backward and the other side is a little less civilized, and all the kind of racist characterizations that typically racist societies of settler colonial that are settler colonial societies always perpetuate against the other. But never mind what I say, never mind what Palestinians have been claiming for decades. Amnesty International last year came out with a very, very detailed and very comprehensive report claiming clearly that Israel has been engaged in the crime of apartheid since it was established. So what I say, I certainly figured this out a long time ago. Palestinians have been saying this even longer, but now Amnesty International, you can't be more credible than that, did very thorough research for several years and came out with this very, very clear report. And by the way, the report also has recommendations how to combat the apartheid state and what other countries and what non-governmental organizations should do in order to combat the apartheid regime. This savagery that we're seeing, this attack on Gaza that we're seeing is revenge. It's revenge by a country that was humiliated and now is trying to seek revenge by murdering, killing and attacking the weakest people on earth, perhaps. We saw on October 7th a relatively small group of fighters, Palestinian fighters, coming out of the most oppressed, maybe the poorest places on earth, and completely debilitating and not to say paralyzing the state of Israel for weeks. So that was a humiliating blow for the state of Israel, who likes to see itself as capable, who likes to see itself as master of, having its master of military and master of intelligence capabilities. And all of this was proven to be absolutely false. So now, in order to somehow gain some kind of their pride back, they are lashing out at defenseless Palestinians. And as we know, they've killed many, many thousands, and the destruction is horrible. I don't think there's a strategic goal here. I think it's just pure killing for the sake of killing, for the sake of revenge. At the end of the day, there will be a ceasefire. At the end of the day, Israel will have to deal with the fact that it's an apartheid state, that it's governing, millions of people without rights. And one would hope that this particular case right now that we're seeing of rage and savagery will show the world what Israel is really about. And we've seen several states already call back their diplomatic missions and close the Israeli missions in their countries. Hopefully other countries will follow. The excuse that Israel is killing Palestinians in Gaza because of Hamas is absolutely ridiculous. And like you said, they're killing and arresting thousands in the West Bank, and they are harassing Palestinian citizens of Israel and arresting them. So, but they don't have to answer to anyone, so they don't explain it. When the world is worried about the Israeli hostages held in Gaza, where were they when thousands of Palestinians are being held on a regular basis for decades by Israel? Where was the world then? These are not hostages. You're only a hostage if you're an Israeli Jew, but if you're a Palestinian, you're not a hostage when you're taken away like this, when you're a political prisoner. So the hypocrisy here is terrible, and hopefully this catastrophe in Gaza, this savagery that's being displayed by Israel, will help the world to wake up and say enough is enough. A life is a life. And I have to quote King Abdullah of Jordan, who said that Arabs are seeing now that in the eyes of the West, their lives do not matter. The lives of Arabs don't matter, and that's exactly what we're seeing. So hopefully the world will wake up to this and realize that they should not support Israel. They cannot, in good conscience, support the state of Israel anymore.
Ljevičarski anti-apartheidni dio izraelskog društva ovih dana je u manjini. Nakon napada 7. oktobra država je bila u šoku, pa su njihovi glasovi uglavnom ušutkani pozivima za osvetom i porukama koje dolaze iz Netanjahuove vlade. Ipak na marginama izraelskog javnog diskursa antiratni glasovi se i dalje čuju. Ljudi poput Orly Noy. Ona je novinarka i urednica koja sarađuje s nekoliko ljevičarskih medija. Osim toga, predsjednica je vodeće izraelske organizacije za ljudska prava B'Tselem. Njena poruka je da, iako izraelsko društvo prešutno odobrava etničko čišćenje i genocidno nasilje nad Palestincima, to ne predstavlja stav većine.
How I'm feeling is a very difficult question. Broken, worried, anxious, angry, many mixed feelings. So my name is Orly Noy. I'm a Jerusalem-based journalist and editor. I also serve as the chair for the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem.
בוקר טוב לכם, השעה 6:15 ואנחנו במשדר חדשות מיוחד בעקבות מטח טילים ורקטות שנורה לשטח ישראל.
Saturday tends to be a very quiet day here in Jerusalem. We woke up very early to the sound of sirens, and we immediately understood that those weren't regular sirens, those were sirens of war. It's incredibly difficult to really thoroughly analyze the impact of October 7th on the Israeli society.
ישראל במלחמה, במערכה שלא ידענו כמוה שנים רבות, מלחמה שבה האזרחים נמצאים בחזית.
Without a doubt, this is conceived as the biggest tragedy, disaster that the country has ever experienced. One of the very worrying things that has been happening in Israel since October 7th is the silencing of anyone who dares to speak about a context. You cannot detach the October 7th from 16 years of a siege in the level of counting the amount of calories that every Gazan is allowed to consume daily. And of course, given the annual bombing, every summer we're just waiting for Israel to bomb Gaza. This is not justification. What Hamas did on October 7th was really an unbelievably cruel and heinous crime. But it came within a context. Just to present it as a satanic, no-reason attack, just driven out of animal urges or anti-Semitism, is not helping us to find a way out of this circle of blood. Voices such as mine, and of course I'm not the only one, the voice against dehumanization of Palestinians. We've always been conceived as extremists, as radicals. October 7th turned me and voices such as mine into public enemies. They are calling us Hamas supporters, they are calling us traitors. I must say with great disappointment and sorrow that some of the voices that joined that public persecution against voices such as ours used to protest with us against occupation, against oppression.
אנחנו עומדים מול אויבים אכזריים, אני לא אומר כל הערבים, אבל יש אויבים אכזריים גם בתוך ערביי ישראל.
It's really frightening to be a Palestinian citizen in Israel right now. There are dozens upon dozens upon dozens of arrests of Palestinian citizens for minor things such as liking a post on Facebook that expresses any solidarity with the Gazan people. not with the Hamas. The Israeli police made it very clear that basically it's illegal to oppose the war. This is the reason that the leadership of the Palestinian citizens were arrested. They actually notified the Israeli police that they wanted to hold a quiet, small rally against the war. They were all arrested. So the same day when we went for a silent protest, Jewish activists, against those arrests, we were brutally beaten by the police. We just stood there with masking tapes on our mouths, and they just came at us, beating us up, making arrests. I'm really worried that once the dust of war sets, we will face a new reality in terms of the relations between the state and its Palestinian citizens, and in terms of the shrinking spaces of Palestinians inside the Israeli civil society. The Israeli media has always been very much patriotic, but since October 7th, the Israeli mainstream media became full collaborator with those trends, mainly by completely blocking out the Israeli public from receiving information about what's going on the other side. As a progressive mainstream media, Haaretz plays a very important role. The constant coverage of Amira Haas, of Gidon Levy, of Hagar Sheizaf, those are really precious, important, valuable journalists. But exactly because of that important role of Haaretz, it is so disappointing to see that they are giving room to heinous opinion pieces, completely dehumanizing Palestinians in Gaza. I did expect a shift in the opinion of people, but not to that extent. Such a trauma, a collective trauma, creates a need to rejoin your tribe, from which, as a leftist, you've been excluded for a very, very long time. So this collective trauma is sort of an invitation for those who left, quote unquote, the tribe, to gather back in, embrace the collective narrative. And this is what many of the left camp did. October 7th completely shook up that equation that Israel was the oppressor, the bad guys. The Palestinians were always in the place of the victims. And the Israeli left is the good guys. All of a sudden, for one moment, the Palestinians stepped out of the place of being just victims and became victimizers. That moment broke down the understanding of the reality for many people. It's a result of constructing the Palestinian case for so many years solely as a humanitarian case rather than a political one. One of the things that really hurt the most for me is the delegitimization of my own grief over October 7th. It's like we were stripped from the legitimacy to share that public grief if we do not support the massacre in Gaza right now. And if you're not willing to be fully part of that narrative, you're not allowed to even grieve the horrible disaster of October 7th.
Od početka izraelskih napada na Gazu ubijeno je više od 14.000 Palestinaca. Uprkos dogovorima o kratkotrajnim prekidima ratnih dejstava, ne nazire se rješenje krize. Visoki izraelski zvaničnici pozivaju na dugoročno vojno prisustvo u Gazi. Međutim, američki odbacuju ponovnu izraelsku okupaciju pojasa po završetku rata. Šta čeka Pojas Gaze nakon rata?
Stambena područja, bolnice i izbjeglički kampovi u pojasu Gaze mete su nemilosrdnih izraelskih napada proteklih više od 40 dana. Dok komandanti izraelske vojske govore da je glavni zadatak uništavanje tunela i komandnih štabova Hamasa, premijer Benjamin Netanjahu suočava se s rastućim bijesom u Izraelu jer nije uspio spriječiti Hamasove napade 7. oktobra. Rat u Gazi i njegove posljedice odlučit će političku budućnost izraelskog premijera.
אני יכול להגיד לך מה לא יהיה. לא יהיה חמאס. אני אגיד לך מה עוד לא יהיה. לא יהיה שם רשות אזרחית שמחנכת את הילדים שלהם לשנוא את ישראל, להרוג ישראלים, לחסל את מדינת ישראל. לא יכולה להיות שם רשות שמשלמת.
Netanjahu je negirao izvještaje koji se uvjerišu da bi njegova vlada mogla predati Gazu palestinskim vlastima. Njegovi krajnje desničarski saveznici, Itamar Ben-Gvir i Bezalel Smotriš, zalažu se za naseljavanje doseljenika u Gazu i prisiljavanje Palestinaca da napuste svoju zemlju. Hamas kaže da je rat daleko od kraja i da će se boriti protiv pokušaja da se predsjedniku Mahmudu Abbasu omogući ponovno kontrolisanje Gaze.
ونقول للإدارة الأمريكية ولقادة الاحتلال إن غزة لن يحكمها إلا أهلها ولا سلطة سياسية أو أمنية إلا للفلسطينيين فيها فنحن شعب حر لا يقبل الوصاية من أحد وستكون دماؤنا وأرواحنا ثمنا لحريتنا.
Palestinski lider Mahmud Abbas suočava se s delikatnim zadatkom. Ako pristane na dogovor s Izraelom, Palestinci će to shvatiti kao čin izdaje. A to će dodatno narušiti njegovu vlast na zapadnoj obali. A to je nešto što Abbasov pokret Fatah želi spriječiti.
I think if we get our act together, if we come out of the blame game internally, if we are to focus on the future and be convinced that Netanyahu's war is not only on Gaza, it is on the West Bank as well. So he'll finish with Gaza, turn to the West Bank. His concept is the total displacement of Palestinians, is the eradication of Palestinian identity.
Na nedavnom sastanku u Saudijskoj Arabiji, arapski i muslimanski lideri pozvali su na prekid rata te omogućavanje dolaska humanitarne pomoći u pojas Gaze, ali su također jasno stavili do znanja da neće slati svoje trupe za pružanje sigurnosti na toj teritoriji, s obzirom na to da je to rizičan potez koji može izazvati gnjev u njihovim državama.
Toliko u ovom izdanju emisije. Pratite nas i na portalu balkans.aljazeera.net. Doviđenja.